This may actually be my favorite episode thus far. I know I've said that a couple of times. And there's another episode that I'm really looking forward to in the future. It's actually in this season. But this is a really good episode. It kind of all comes together with this one. Acting, directing, music, visual styles, story, and of course the writing. What I wanted to comment on, though, is first, before we get into all of the meaty, goody, awesome juiciness of the episode itself, is Majel Barrett. For those of you not aware, Majel Barrett plays Lwaxana Troi and is also the widow, of Gene Roddenberry over on Star Trek. Now, this probably sounds weird with the perspective of now, for anybody who wasn't really active in the sci-fi community back when Babylon 5 and Deep Space Nine and all these were actually coming out. But there was actually a bit of a rivalry between several groups of fans of both shows. And I find that interesting, especially in hindsight, because most people I know, with the perspective of now rather than then, are fans of both. Rather than, Babylon 5 is way better than Deep Space Nine. Star Trek is way better than Babylon 5. There was a lot of going back and forth, especially on the message boards and whatnot at the time, and in conventions. Now, I say that's also odd because everything I've seen ever has indicated that none of that was on behalf of the creators of both shows. There were quite a few people involved in Star Trek who really liked Babylon 5, and quite a few people involved in Babylon 5 who really liked Star Trek. And if you haven't been paying attention, there's a lot of actors going back and forth between Star Trek and Babylon 5. In fact, the very next episode is going to have Captain Braxton from Voyager over on Babylon 5, just to name one of 1,000 examples. So, Majel Barrett had basically put out a release. In fact, actually, I think I saved it for this purpose. Give me just a moment. Because she wanted to... here it is. Yes, I did find it. So, Majel Barrett has often been called the First Lady of Star Trek. And J. Michael Straczynski, JMS, is someone who wanted to kind of reach out to Star Trek and kind of mend the two things. He has said on many occasions the idea is, here it is right here, it's actually a direct quote from JMS. We are very pleased to have Majel appearing in Babylon 5. As the wife of Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry, her appearance on our show can help dispel the notion held by some that one cannot be a fan of both series. Majel and I discussed this between us, and we both view this rivalry as unproductive. We are both extending our hands across respective fictional universes in a show of solidarity. So we're very happy she's chosen to endorse Babylon 5 in this way. Blah, 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 blah. And Majel Barrett herself is actually someone who posited this idea to begin with. She liked Babylon 5, and she wanted to give this kind of a gesture. I want to add one other thing. I've actually talked about this over my Voyager stuff, believe it or not. There's a lot of bias against Lwaxana Troi because in several episodes, Lwaxana Troi is an unpleasant person, I think is the nicest way I can put that. And I tend to agree with that perspective. There are several episodes I cannot stand Lwaxana Troi in it. But I want to make it absolutely clear that none of that extends to the actress. Majel Barrett's actually a really cool person from everything I've seen, and is the kind of person that I would have actually liked to have been friends with had I been born about a decade or two earlier. Because she's a very awesome person. She's very understanding. She's very tolerant. She's very diplomatic. She's very friendly. I have actually seen her at conventions, not personally, conventions I have viewed through television and whatnot. And so unlike some Trek actors, I've never actually gotten to meet her. But yeah, I think that it's awesome that she basically gave out this open invitation of, why don't we make this work? And so, JM, if you pay attention to the episode, her role was basically written into this episode. She actually has a fairly minor role in this episode overall, and most of the events of her and Londo only barely coincide with the main plot. But I like that he went that extra effort to make sure that she not only had a role, but she had a role of significance. Because what she says to the viewers, to Londo and to Vir, is significant for their characters and for our enjoyment of the show. I guess I'll talk about that next. I mean, why not? It's the smallest section of my notes here. I've noticed I've been doing my notes in Babylon 5 very differently. In Voyager, for example, I can usually just go down the line as the episode happens, and then if there's something major I want to talk about thematically, or like the healthcare thing that happened in Critical Care, for example, which I have no idea when that episode's coming in relation to this. Actually, I do. That episode's coming out 2 weeks ago, looks like. Obviously, I record in advance. But you know, I put that in like its own section. I like that's going over here, so I could talk about that separate. For Babylon 5, usually there's multiple arcs, and they weave between each other, but generally each arc is over here. So I'm like, okay, talk about this arc up here, talk about this arc down here, talk about this arc down here. So in the Londo section down here, first of all, I do like Londo's discussion about the proper way to write reports for Vir, because there's this whole commentary there about no, this isn't intended to inform. This is intended to look good and to make them feel comfortable about themselves and all that fun stuff. I was reminded of a common thought that's posited about CEOs in modern corporations, and that's been true for like 3 decades at this point, really, since the 90s. The idea that a CEO has access to no real information in order to lead their company because all the information that comes to them is doctored, just like the report Londo wanted to give to the royal court. So, I feel kind of bad for them, really. Aside from the bajillions of dollars, of course. The other thing I want to comment on here with the Londo stuff, there's this great speech that Majel Barrett gives about greatness, which is a really well done speech, and JMS has actually admitted that while he designed it for several intentions, he was at least thinking of Roddenberry personally when he wrote that speech. The idea that greatness is not recognized in its time, and we always try to shoo away greatness. And I just want to give one small commentary about that really quick. I'm actually going to talk about this a lot when we do our opening to TNG. I disagree with Roddenberry on many things, and the man was a capitalist. And I do mean that as an insult. But, despite all that, I do have to give the man credit, as I give George Lucas credit, actually, in almost the same fashion. For all their flaws, for all the things they've done wrong, the men both had vision. And there was a lot of ideas there, and those ideas just needed other people to help work them into what we now know as Star Trek, and to make it into this functional form. And whether or not Roddenberry was this great man or not is not something I am qualified to say. But I do have to point out that I have a franchise that I have loved since I was a very young child, that I learned to love from my mum, who was also a fan of Star Trek when she was younger. And all of that came because of this man and his desire to see this vision come to fruition, and the many, many, many people who helped him do it. So, I don't give Roddenberry sole credit for Star Trek. That would be ridiculous. But he does get credit for it, in addition to the many other people involved. It's a good speech, too, because it reaches out to Londo. This is one of the precious few times where we see Londo drop all pretenses. He even has the pretenses up, oh, no, you're here to talk about the Earth Alliance, and blah, blah, blah. And she just cuts him off and starts talking about the Emperor, reminding him of the fact that he was quite literally there when the Emperor died, and also is the only person who heard his final words. And that thought just, you could see it hit Londo like a ton of bricks. Bam! And then just all the pretense is gone. He's like, okay, yes, here. This is what I actually want. This is why I actually brought you here. And he actually drops the pretenses earlier, not with her, but with Vir. It's like, she's a seer. I need to know about this great destiny. And Vir says, so you want her to tell you that it's right. And he's like, no, I want her to tell me that it's wrong. We are starting to see, I shouldn't say starting, we have been seeing for a couple episodes now, but it's becoming much, much more apparent that Londo is actively trying to leave the path now. He was at his worst. He did things he shouldn't. He is absolutely complicit in many, many horrible things. And he is recognizing that and trying to get off that path. And he has been doing so basically ever since he separated from Mr. Molden. And that will be continuing to be part of his next character arc over the next several episodes. The prophecy that she gives to them is interesting to me in many reasons. First of all, it's a very well-written prophecy, because it actually... Here, let me get this off my screen. It actually it comes to pass. Let's just go ahead and say this. I don't feel like this is spoiling. Unlike other possibilities in various many fictions where it's like, this will happen. Nah, it didn't happen. Or we averted it. This prophecy will come to pass. Everything that Morella says, the Lady Morella says, comes to pass. The best part about it, it's debatable how. What I mean by that is each of the bullet points she gives for the prophecy comes true in multiple different ways over the course of the rest of the show. And in several different manners, the prophecy comes to fruition. So you can interpret it however you want, knowing the show, looking back at it. I know, we have this rule about no spoilers. So I've decided after some discussion with myself and a friend of mine who really likes Babylon 5, not to actually really discuss the prophecy in full detail. But I tend to adhere to what is, I believe, is the most common interpretation of it. All I'm going to say about that is Jakar, as opposed to certain other things that could be perceived as being that. Jakar and Sheridan and the obvious thing at the end there. That's just my interpretation. But I really like one other thing about this. It's actually a very subtle point. She tells Vir that he will be emperor. That's coming true, by the way. And she mentions this and says, and he starts laughing. Because Vir mentally, even though he has grown significantly, even though he has demonstrated many times he has that wisdom, that ability to think outside the box, that ability to perceive things as they are, he is, and I know I keep hammering this point in, but he has demonstrated to be a fairly wise character. And yet, despite all that, he is still hammered down in terms of his self-esteem, in terms of his mental perspective, and everything else. He is still the kind of person who looks at himself and says, no, I'm a joke. And it's a subtle point, because it calls back to what Londo said to him not a few episodes ago. Don't ever let them think you're a joke. Don't ever let them pull you down like that. And Vir thinks he's a joke, and then she looks at him and says, no, not joking. It's probably the first moment, really, that Vir has started to actually recognize that other people can recognize who he really is. He himself has already been on a journey of self-discovery, and this whole Minbari thing has just been helping that. Let's talk about the Senate thing. I mean, the other two plots are very tied together. I've basically got a section of general thoughts here about the coup and the Civil War and all the martial law stuff going back home. And then I've got thoughts specifically about the Night Watch. So, the Senate was dissolved by Emperor President Clark. And I know we joke a lot, actually, about how pathetic and worthless senators are, at least here in the States. I don't know how other countries do it, but here in the States, when we look at U.S. senators, they're a joke. They are people who we deride and mock and ridicule on a regular basis for being fairly disgusting, corrupt individuals. Generalizing, of course, but it's still, it's like right up there with making fun of lawyers, right? I mean, we all make fun of lawyers, we all make fun of politicians. It's two of the most common things to mock in human history as far as comedy goes. I mention that, though, because that's the realm of comedy, the realm of mockery, the realm of the fictional, if you will. I want you to imagine just for a moment I know you probably don't live in the United States if you're listening. Maybe you do. But I want you to imagine that your military of whatever nation you live in has just opened fire on your government, on your parliament or your House of Lords or your council or your Senate or your Congress or whatever it is you've got. I want you to imagine what that's like. Not joking, not, kill them all. No, I mean literally actually opening fire with automatic weapons with intent to kill. I know that's a weird thing to pick up on for me personally, but that more than anything else really hammered home exactly what kind of government Clark wanted to institute, the way he wanted to run things. There's this quote he gave when he was unveiled, where he says, I've wanted so long for Santiago to be dead. We see in Clark, through his actions, we don't really see much of himself. I'll be talking about him later, don't worry. But we see through his actions that this is a man who is not someone who wants to rule. He does not want to lead. He does not want to be the kind of person who is in charge of a nation. He wants all of the benefits of rule. He's the other side of character. I've talked about this a few times. He's the kind of person who wants to be on top of the heap and to do whatever he wants and to get away with whatever he wants. And the fact that he has sufficiently convinced aspects of the military, it's actually the elite guard, but point remaining, people with guns, in order to fire on civilian government, is insane. And by the way, in Babylon 5, the difference between civilian government and military government is made very, very clear. In this episode, actually, but it's also a thing regardless. Yeah, one other thing I want to talk about. JMS has had lengthy discussions defending his writing regarding the Night Watch and President Clark's takeover. Because one of the common grievances that was leveled at JMS when Babylon 5 was coming out was, oh, this would never happen. This is just completely fictional. There's no way reasonable, intelligent people would ever let something like President Clark's regime come to power. Come on! I mean, the Night Watch claiming power, that's never possible. If you are even remotely a student of history, you know that that kind of thing has happened, well, more times than I'd care to recount, but two very large and very open and very well-documented times that has happened in real-life history within the last century, with the Nazi Party and with McCarthyism, and the whole blacklisting thing that happened in the States, and the many, many documented things that the Nazi Party did during Goebbels and all theirs reign. And that happened around well-informed, intelligent people. I'm kind of with JMS on this one, because the point is, he has ardently defended himself on this. He has actually gotten upset. I've heard him speaking in this. He has actually been like, the very fact that you're trying to shove away and say this would never happen is why this kind of thing happens. That's why this kind of tyranny is allowed to exist, because people just say, oh, it's not my problem, or I can't deal with it, or this will never actually come to be. This isn't real. Come on, be realistic. And I agree with him. This kind of stuff cannot happen without support of the people. But that support is so easy to think. There's this brilliant scene in this episode. I'm skipping ahead of my notes, but forgive me. Garibaldi gives this impassioned plea. It's not even speechified. I'll talk more about it later. But he gives this passionate plea to the security guards who he has uplifted and worked with for years. Several of them didn't have jobs, or he helped them out with their personal problems or their wives. He was their friend in addition to their boss. He was their team. He was part of that cooperative. But what's the one thing that Night Watch kept emphasizing? And they do it in this episode too, but they've been emphasizing this almost every episode they've been present in so far. Oh, you're safe as long as you're in Night Watch. Everyone else is under suspicion. Fear or disbelief, that's how tyrannies like this, like Clark's administration, gain power. And I know that's an easy thing to say. I don't know what I would do in their case. I am intelligent enough to understand that I don't know what that would be like. I have not been put into that circumstance. And there's certain things in life you just can't understand unless you actually experience it for yourself. I know that from deep personal experience. There's some things you just can't predict how you're going to react or what you're going to do in the moment. I don't know what I would do in that moment. I understand that fear very well. I understand the fear of being powerless, of they could hurt me, or hurt my life, or hurt my family. I understand that. But acknowledging that, and trying to work against that, trying to work through that, in my opinion, is the best possible path forward. Trying to just wave it away with a romanticized notion of just, oh, just stand up and fight and it'll be okay, that doesn't work that way. And Babylon 5 actually shows that rather clearly, because Garibaldi stands up and says, no, this is stupid. Doesn't work. Principles, morality, ethics, the thoughts of right and wrong are not what won the day in this episode. But I'll get to that later. Couple notes, just going through the episode here. The construction of this episode, lots and lots, brilliant cuts back and forth in scenes, brilliant directing, brilliant writing. Again, JMS's style is really starting to come into fruition now that he's hit the meat of his own story. You can almost tell that JMS is actually excited about writing episodes at this point. Like, he's like, oh, finally I get to tell this story. You know, that you know what I'm talking about, right? We all get that way when it's like, oh, man, I've been writing up all this build-up. I can finally pay off. Yeah, you know. There's some really great stuff back and forth. There's some really great things. Probably one of my favorite little tidbits, just a little thing, is they're having this discussion and some guy walks in and he's like, hey, it's a private meeting. Go away. I like that because one thing I've wondered basically since the beginning is how the hell are they keeping this private with all the people running around at this station? It's like the first time they've actually had to say, hey, go away. Meeting. General Haig presents an interesting problem in this episode because General Haig is someone who's in the know. He knows about the conspiracy. He knows about the plot. He knows about Clark's complacency and blah, blah, blah. And that person is extremely dangerous to other conspirators. No, I don't mean Haig is going to like betray them or anything like that, although he could. But what I really mean is that that kind of person has a lot of information that could theoretically be extracted either through promises or through various methods that are available. And that kind of information would be extremely damaging. It's kind of a variant of the all your eggs in one basket mentality. Now you might say, well, all the eggs aren't in a Haig's basket, but they kind of are, because when it comes to information, if you have an in-the-know circle in a conspiracy or in a government or in a corporation or whatever, everyone in the know has all the eggs. Anyone else with intent to destroy or harm or injure or dissect or conquer gets one of those people out of that. That person, that group, that organization that has grabbed that one person now has all the eggs because they were all in one basket. I know this is a weird analogy, but you understand what I mean by this? It's one of the great risks of having people who you are fully informative on everything. It's one of the reasons why so many conspiracies have that whole concept, need-to-know basis. Because they want to make sure that if anything happens to you, everyone isn't doomed as a consequence of that. And if you've been paying attention, basically everyone on the War Council, Sheridan, Delenn, Franklin, Garibaldi, Marcus, Ivanova, Haig, all of these people have all been in the know. They're all in the need-to-know thing. And there's good reasons for that, but it means that all of them are a point of failure for the entire organization. I like the scene between Garibaldi and G'Kar. There's actually two, but they're very brief. They're very friendly. I do like the idea that Garibaldi comes in and says, get you out of here. He says that he's doing that because he doesn't want to spare the men to watch him. But I know Garibaldi pretty well. I think he was planning, just in case things went south and martial law was declared on the station and Night Watch made a move. G'Kar was out of their grasp. I don't think he did it because he thought G'Kar would help them. G'Kar did end up helping. That ended up being a crucial move for the sake of the episode. But I don't think Garibaldi did it like that. I don't think he's Batman or whatever. I think he did it because G'Kar was his frickin' friend. And he wanted G'Kar to get the hell out of there. There's this really, really great scene between the General and Sheridan. I honestly want to know how many of you caught the subtext in his speech and tone the first time you watched it. Honest answer. I'll admit I didn't. The whole time I'm watching it, I'm thinking, I could tell something was off. Because he wasn't, whoever the actor was did a good job, because he wasn't acting like he was stepping in line. He wasn't acting like one of Clark's apologists, basically, or a member of the regime. But he was saying stuff like he was a member of the regime. And those two things contrast to each other. And if I'm 100% honest with myself, I thought it was just an acting problem when I first watched it. Like, oh, this is just, the actor's wrong. But it turns out that was actually very deliberate. I do think they were way too blatant with it later, with Sheridan playing over and over certain sections of his speech so that we, the audience, got it. But I'll talk a little bit more about that concept in a bit. I have a whole little mini section to talk about that. The back and forth between that scene and the Night Watch being informed that they're taking over is chilling. Very, very well done. And the Night Watch's desire. I'll talk a little bit more about the Night Watch in a minute. I like Talon as usual. He's awesome. It's great to see him again. And I love how G'Kar gives him this great rhetoric of this answer. And Talon says, that's great, but that didn't actually answer my question. I love how he just cuts right through it. And G'Kar says, you're right. And then there's this great scene. I love G'Kar. I mean, I've liked G'Kar this whole show, but we have officially reached the point where G'Kar has elevated to my second favorite character, and he will stay there for the remainder of the show, as he's sneaking around on the bridge like, I may have something that can help us. I have an idea. I mentioned the episode does a lot of showing and implying. It actually, other than the one scene where Sheridan plays the audio clip over and over and over, the episode doesn't treat you like you're stupid, and I like that. It treats you like you can put the pieces together. We don't see the scene where G'Kar outlines his plan. We don't see the scene where Zack has the debate with the others. We see the effects of those scenes because we can put the pieces together for ourselves. We don't need to be carried by the hand, and I like that. I also... There's a very, very powerful scene, where Sheridan is just sitting there, in full uniform, just sitting there in the dark waiting, and then the chime beams that says, "This is your wake-up call." Again, it's treating you like you're smart. It doesn't say it outright. In a script that was treating you like you're stupid, there would be a line like, "Man, I didn't get any sleep last night." But instead we are just shown that Sheridan has been sitting there all night, tense, unable to sleep, absolutely tormented and troubled by what's happening and what's about to happen. It adds tremendous weight to that. And then he slowly gets up and buttons himself up and goes to deal with the Night Watch. Even though, well... And then, of course, there's G'Kar's desire to be in. I like that for many reasons. Of course, G'Kar is the one who keeps up on this. And I do like how Sheridan only makes the one sort of half attempt to dissuade him. But I love G'Kar's response. "I have all the time in the world. Do you?" And Sheridan's like... But Sheridan's the kind of person who will not make that kind of unilateral decision unless it's what he considers to be a military decision, a tactical decision. He will make an order and follow through on it. But if it's something involving, conspiracies and government and all this political crap that he hates, I remind you, he's going to get buy-in. And Delen's not even on the station, if you remember. We'll see more about that next episode. Let's talk about Night Watch. So once again, we see Von Armstrong as security guard number 1. I looked it up again. He's still listed as security guard number 1. Didn't even give him a name, even though he's a fairly major character and basically the antagonist of the episode. I do like that, as usual. I mean, this is all just follow-through. This is all just the same things that's been happening. The establishment of how the Night Watch has been coercing people is fully present here. This is just an emergency situation. There's this conspiracy and this external threat. We have been granted power, authority, and responsibility, and we're going to use it to help Earth. All of his statements is just the next step. He's taking one further step in the Night Watch cause of trying to advance their control over Babylon 5 and over Earth. Earth's interest in general. I want you to think about a fun little thought exercise, just really quick, will you? Just for my sake. I want you to think about what the future would have been like. Ignore the shadows, if you will, for a moment. But, I mean, you can think about them if you want. What would the future of this setting have been if President Clark's administration gained total control over Babylon 5? Think about it for a moment. I'm not sure anyone at the time understood how significant and how impacting that would have been. But... Even in the moment, you could tell how big of a deal that would be, given that this is basically the only real neutral hub for all of the major powers in the known galaxy. Think about it. The line scene is chilling in so many ways. There's only one guy we see who says no, who turns in his badge, I can't think what they're called, the thing they've got on their wrists, and turns in his gun and says, "Nope. I'm out." And so many of the others just, here's your armband, here's your thing, here's your armband, here's your thing. And it ties in with a comment that's actually done much later in the episode where Zack says, "Is this all of them?" And Von Armstrong, security guard number 1, says, "Yep, everyone except for the ones who didn't have the guts to do this." I forget how he phrased it, but that's what he means. Everyone except for those who wasn't on our side. But don't worry, we'll deal with them after this is over. Yeah. So, Zack's reaction to this whole thing is very appropriate. And again, is why tyrannies can succeed in real life. Well, just play along. Just put the armband on and go in there and don't make a fuss. It won't be a big deal. Just it'll all blow over. You don't want to make waves, etc., etc. And then Garibaldi goes in there, and I said I'd talk about this again because it's a great scene. It is very, very Garibaldi. I've mentioned before how Garibaldi is a great detective and how he knows how to connect with people and put the dots together. He's really, really good at that. But what I like most about him is if I was to put him on the D&D alignment scale, he would not be lawful. He would be chaotic. Chaotic good, specifically. he actually is very much against the rules, even though he believes in concepts like due process and whatnot. He only adheres to those so long as those things adhere to his sense of ethics and morality, which always comes first. So he goes in there and he doesn't speechify, not really. That wouldn't be Garibaldi. He goes in there and he just talks from the heart. He just yells and rants and gets angry because that's what's on his mind. Because that's who he is. He's just the kind of person who will emotionally expose himself and say here. And that's doubly important for Garibaldi because remember, this is a man who once trusted someone and that someone completely and utterly betrayed him. For him to open himself up like he does in that scene has so much additional impact when you really sit back and think about it. And again, he goes by, to each of the men. I helped you. I got you a job. I took care of your wife. I was here for you. I have built you together into this unit. Don't tell me this frickin', I forget which armband. Tell me, this frickin' armband is your solution. You're going to adhere to this, and none of them actually stand up for him. They're all afraid. They're all apathetic. They all think, well, this will just blow over. Just put on your armband. It's not like anything's changing. It's just a new uniform code, new dress code. All these perspectives make all these people just kind of say nothing. But what I like about it is Garibaldi has not made a personal attempt to reach out to Zack. And if I'm being honest, from a totally neutral, armchair general perspective, that is the wrong choice to make. Because having someone inside of Night Watch would have been immensely important and useful. But despite not personally reaching out to Zack, he does reach out to Zack by being so honest in that scene while Zack is there. He really does just lay it out. And in that moment, Zack sees the difference between the fearful people who are following the orders of a man who is talking about power and authority, and the impassioned plea given by the man who was his friend. And in that moment, he sees the two sides, probably for the first time, as they actually are. And now that he understands the two sides, that's when he makes his choice. That's when, to continue the analogy, his uniform finally fits him. He even rips the armband off. It's actually a great scene. I'm getting just a little bit misty of it because there's so much undercurrent for those scenes. But there's something even better there, too. I mentioned in a previous episode, I think it was actually the last episode, hang on, where's my notes? Messages from Earth? I think that was it. How, despite the fact that the heroes had, it was Messages from Earth. Despite the fact that the heroes had this big win, they still lost. Because the show is intelligent, the show is complicated, the show is showing that just because you killed the dragon doesn't mean the kingdom is saved, to stretch the analogy. In this episode, we get a big win. A huge win. It's a win for Babylon 5. It's a win for the setting overall, given what will come. It's a win for the good guys. It's a win for Shakar. It's a win for the Narn. It is a win for the basic concept of good against the evils of what Clark's administration represents. Irregardless, yes, I'm using that word, of Clark's administration itself. Okay, fine, regardless of Clark's administration. Is that better? Does that make you feel better? I love it because all of this tremendous win happened because of one man who was basically a glorified extra. Zack sealed this win for them. Now, he didn't do it alone. He couldn't do it alone. He needed the support of many other people and individuals who all kind of came together just so to allow this win to happen. But this was a big win for the good guys. And again, for Shakar and his movement towards these events, to helping the Narn move forward, to helping in the eventual fight against the Shadows and the Clark administration, this was a huge success. Now, I also want to comment on top of this. It's just so crucial that this is still a big win that is actually a temporary solution. Let's talk about that illegal order thing I've been putting off here. Because this is not the good guys' triumph, really. I mean, it is. This was, like I said, this was a big win. But it's more like this is a temporary measure to keep things going forward. One thing that has been mentioned over and over and over in several episodes, including this one leading up to this, is that all their hopes rested on General Haig and his coup. And, not to get meta on this, but at the time I remind you that utter alterations of the status quo were kind of unusual in television. I've mentioned this before. In a modern TV show, this kind of trick wouldn't work. But in the old days, things going back to normal was kind of the norm. I hate to reference Deep Space Nine yet again, but there was a series of episodes, 7 long, I think, where the main crew was kicked off Deep Space Nine. And then they went back to Deep Space Nine and the status quo resumed. Now, that kind of thing is what we're expecting here. They've been building up this Clark administration thing forever, and then we unveil this evidence against him, and then Haig reveals himself, and he's fighting against him when we hear this news that he's calling out for support. And the impression there is that things are going to go back to the status quo. Haig will displace, remove, get rid of Clark. The Clark administration will fall. And then things will kind of go back to the norm, and we'll be able to go back to our everyday episode thing. And that's been the undercurrent for several episodes now. And in character, the characters keep hoping for that because that's their one big hope. That's their Hail Mary pass. Haig will succeed in his coup. We'll fix things back at Earth. All we need to do is buy time. How many times have they said things like that? All we need to do is delay. We can't be shown yet. We can't play our cards yet. We can't do this. This whole Sheridan's solution to the Night Watch problem is literally a temporary measure, and it's called out as a temporary measure, and he's like, it's okay, Haig will take care of this. And then, well, I'll get to that in a moment, but my point is that this illegal orders thing is something that's very, very, very important. I've actually referenced it more than once before. Babylon 5 has already laid the groundwork for legal and illegal orders, avoiding the chain of command, and there's a few other things about that. That will actually be a recurring theme for Sheridan in the future. Because, see, here's the thing. In a complex setting like Babylon 5, it's not enough that the good guys are the good guys. How many fictional works can you think of, games, movies, books, shows, where the good guys are on the side of right, and we know that, we're the viewers, and therefore they accomplish things that they shouldn't have been able to? Authority figures and legal representatives and laws are basically bypassed or flat out broken because it's okay, they're the good guys. How many have you seen that do that? I bet you couldn't even count them all, to be 100% blunt. Babylon 5 doesn't take that approach because it doesn't actually work that way. They are the good guys. I would posit definitively that these are good people. But that doesn't matter. They have to find some way to fight against the system in a way that works, rather than trying to bypass the system, or in doing so they will just get more enemies themselves. So they have to work within the realm of what they are allowed. And that's why he clings to this illegal order thing so much, because it gives him leeway to do this correctly. Not right or wrong. Right or wrong had nothing to do with what Sheridan did, ultimately. It was what he wanted to do because Sheridan believes very strongly in right and wrong. But he had to move forward within the confines of the system, the legality, the culture, the government, the military, the social construct that exists there. He had to cling to that illegal order thing and use that as a way to buy time. Then, after all that, General Haig will work, it'll work. We find out the news. Well, there's this great joke scene as Londo and Vir are sitting there both having no idea what to do with each other, which is funny because even in that joke scene it's still quite serious, even though it's presented kind of comically. But then we get the news that the status quo hopes have been destroyed, that Haig's supporters are gone. Haig himself is the only one left. He's on the run and they're hunting for him, and they will be gunning for Babylon 5 next. Once again, the episode ends quietly, and we start to understand not only the complexity of the story, but the reality of what our characters are facing. This is the exact episode, by the way, where I fell in love with Babylon 5. I know that's a weird point to point out. I had very much liked this show up to this point. It was kind of hard to watch it live when it came out, but I missed a few episodes is what I'm saying. But I remember when this episode came out, and I remember thinking, I was actually blown away, because I was believing at the time, as I've lied to you, that this was just going to reset the status quo and they were going to go back to the next day in an adventure of Babylon 5. Hearing that everything had gone so terribly wrong, that their hopes had been dashed, Haig was on the run, I didn't fully get it at the time. I mean, I was kind of young. But I still understood that that had been irrevocably changed, that the entire setting had changed, and the status quo had been altered, and moving forward, would be a different story. And I loved that. And that's the exact moment I realized I was really going to be passionate about this show. Anyways, I just wanted to share that. I hope to see you guys next week when we'll be talking about how things can get even worse. See you around, guys.